Hey Alex, man, I was just listening to some stuff that my guys who still pay attention to the news cycle were telling me, and they're complaining about this Orlando shooting, and it just seems kind of strange and odd. Do you know anything about what might have happened, or at least what the mainstream press is jiving on about?
I like to focus on what the mainstream press is jiving about, how they're spinning this, and how the people are reacting. Because at this point, with so many staged events that we've seen, how are we to believe that any of this is true? You know, it's funny how people don't like the propaganda from CNN. They don't like CNN gun control. They don't like some of CNN's talking points. But if CNN comes out with another headline about terror attacks hitting the homeland, they're all about reposting that and repeating whatever is said by CNN. So I just want to make that point clear, not just CNN, but the media in general. No, people don't like the mainstream media unless the mainstream media is directing their angst, their anger, their rage towards Middle Eastern immigrants. What has me concerned about this story is how I'm seeing the narrative spin on its side ever so slightly. It's as if they're telegraphing that at one point there could be a roundup or a Holocaust or a massive targeting of even the children of Middle Eastern immigrants. So what we do know about the story is his parents are from Afghanistan. And there's also investigations now, some of the stories on Google News looking into his wife. You know, one of them kind of lead it out with kind of a weird statement, like she turned away from a stable life of an arranged marriage and instead chose Omar, you know, bodybuilder slash security guard. So we've been inundated with this for a while, Kyle, and it's adversely affecting the population. And not just like the mainstream population, people that for years have been involved in the liberty movement. And so, you know, what I can say since Paris
Well,
and the so-called parachuting and all the way up until now is people saying things and blogging things in support of violence towards people from other countries in a way that I've never seen prior to the last few years. Even after 9/11, things were fairly mild domestically, even though we had the illegal, unjust war on terror overseas that killed millions. Domestically, things have been fairly calm. Now, things are like erupting to a whole new level.
Well, yeah, and something that I'm noticing is how this suspiciously violent event is really, how do I say this? It's tailor-made. Because when you look at some of the other ones over the past 3 years or so, whether it's the so-called Batman shooter, whether it was the Sikh temple, whether it was Sandy Hook, whether it was really pick any of these, this one in Orlando is unique because of the demographics of the perpetrator, especially when contrasted against the victims. And it's very much sets the stage for the whole left-right paradigm, very much so, right? I mean, the official narrative, more or less, is that the perp is this evil Islamic whatever the hell, and and the victims at the nightclub were basically a bunch of homosexuals. So you can very much see how the authoritarian left and the authoritarian right can essentially make heyday out of this event for their own purposes, right? I think it's just kind of obvious that the authoritarian left will push for more gun control, as they always have, because the guy was using rifles and other types of small arms. And of course, the authoritarian right will point out his ancestry, and essentially will kind of sound a lot like the rug, as it were, with his claims of I want to shut down the borders and all of that. So the authoritarians that really run this insane asylum, which really is a sad excuse for a country, they will I think they will chomp on this without even trying.
Absolutely. What's also troubling is that, lines are being blurred here. So it was radical Islam and then Islam, with people saying that, everyone believes this way or everyone's acting this way and everyone's cutting off heads, which is actually not the truth. Plus, you have all these Muslims. They're being killed by what are actually imposters. We don't have time to get into that. These are imposters. These are not real Muslims. I'm not a Muslim, but my last name is Islamic. Ansary actually goes back to the origin of Islam. I happen to also be involved in the alternative media, as you know, and others know. This isn't really about myself, but it is kind of coming out because, yes, my father is from Afghanistan. And what I want to say about a lot of Middle Eastern immigrants that I've met, first of all, it's troubling that so many of them have been demonized so greatly, because the hundreds that I have met happen to love the U.S. system, the U.S. dollar. I've never seen a movie. I've never seen a sitcom, Kyle. I've never seen a reality TV show that actually accurately depicts the average Middle Eastern immigrant, i.e. the person that was born there and moved here. Let alone someone like me who has Middle Eastern blood, who's straight up American, who only speaks English, who's more spiritual than religious. I'm definitely outside the box. But the average Farsi or Persian speaking Middle Eastern immigrant, and there are many of them, they work at universities. They work at hospitals. Some are in the computer business. Quite a few happen to work for the U.S. military as translators. So I'm alarmed at their silence. I'm alarmed at their silence. I saw a relative who bears the same last name as I, which is Ansary. And she's basically telling her friends off on Facebook, hey, all of you saying all this stuff about Muslims, you should know my family is Muslim. Now, she needs to know she's just looking for trouble going out like that, because a lot of her friends aren't going to get it. Get what? The fact that the really hardcore, radical, extremist stuff that's in the news has been funded for a long time. A lot of Americans are fairly, I'll just say it, retarded when it comes to their basic Afghan history, which they should know if they're going to support intervention in a certain region. That there was a time when the Russians were booted out of Afghanistan. Most people have seen the video of Zbigniew Brzezinski supporting the Mujahideen, which preceded the Taliban. But the Mujahideen was not the Taliban. The Mujahideen was a general name for a lot of people that came together, a resistance group. However, you had more radical members of the Mujahideen, obviously Osama bin Laden and others, and those were the men that got the money, the Stinger missiles. There was a name out there by the name of Mahmoud. I'm not really good with Middle Eastern names or certain Asian names, but he was murdered the day before 9/11, and he was the leader of something called the Northern Alliance. They were like an Afghan militia, and they were not like radical. In fact, they were fighting the radicals. And I even have ancestors that have been targeted by the radical sect of Islam that lived in their own, off-grid reality. I have an ancestor in the 10th century that was more of a mystic, and he had a whole different understanding of the Creator as being something that is more omnipresent, like God is everything type of a thing, which I'm sure people have heard. God is not like some angry person on a uncomfortable throne that's striking lightning bolts down to earth because he's bored. No, he, like others, even listening, he had a different understanding. I'm trying to say a couple things in one breath. I am seeing an AmeriCult that doesn't give 3 fucking seconds to even investigating other periods in history in that region, either within our lifetimes, and knowing that during that period of the Russian invasion, when the West was funding those groups, the leader of the Northern Alliance that was killed before 9/11 said that the radicals were given more Stinger missiles by far than the regular Afghan people. They were never funding the Afghan people in general in an equal, well-dispersed way. Like, okay, you get this many weapons, you get this many weapons, and you get this many weapons. They gave the radicals nearly all the weapons from the beginning. Now, according to official history, the U.S. stopped involving themselves in Afghanistan after the Russians pulled out. But that's not exactly the truth. The Central Intelligence Agency is believed to be behind the foundation of the ISI, which is Pakistan's intelligence. Meanwhile, U.S. propaganda keeps pointing the finger at Iran. Iran, Iran, it's Iran. Now, actually, we can look over here at Pakistan and the ISI. And so the Taliban, which were born out of the Mujahideen, funded with Pakistani money, they conquered Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan, years before 9/11. And of course, most people know that the Taliban banned the production of poppies, which really put a dent in the CIA's black budget, the smuggling under the table, of course, of heroin. And so this is what people forget, is that Afghanistan was destabilized by design. This is worthy of a documentary, and I don't believe that one has ever been made, which is just shocking. I will hold myself back from saying emotional statements like someone deserves their own enslavement. I will abstain from that, but I am shocked that there are so many educated, non-radical, Middle Eastern immigrants to the tune of millions, Kyle, that have chosen to not involve themselves in the alternative media or to support the alternative media. I'm going to pause at that because, we're seeing the Stockholm Syndrome transcend race, I would say. and I don't know how to fix it, and I don't know if it's ever going to go away. Is this humankind's natural inclination to Stockholm Syndrome, where people migrate to an empire? How old is this as far as humanity, where people go from one tribe or region into the gates of an empire and they serve that empire? And if that empire literally slanders and demonizes a whole race and group of people, as long as they're getting paid, as long as they're not feeling targeted, as long as they're feeling threatened by the NSA. I'm shocked, Kyle, at what humans are able to be silent about.
Well, and that's certainly understandable. I guess perhaps it's I've been so used to this kind of thing. It just seems like a normal routine day for me. So, but yeah, it's just, let me put it this way. Until people give up the most dangerous superstition, which is the idea of authority itself, I don't have any reason to believe that this cycle will break of its own accord. And perhaps that's a little bit of a deeper subject for another time regarding why people believe in authority. But what I will say here, just to be a little bit more specific and on topic, is that, yeah, you're right about the the history and what's been happening in Afghanistan for decades. I mean, when you look at Operation Cyclone, the federal government has been arming, equipping, training, and funding the the guys on the ground to fight the Soviets back in the day. And last time I checked, that model of using proxy guerrillas has not changed. In fact, I could have sworn some people at Reason Magazine or antiwar.com have kind of been still on this. And apparently, it seems like ISIS is following kind of a similar pattern. So whether it's, I don't know, man. It's just, if the federal government wasn't...
Here's my greatest concern is for the safety. Right. My greatest concern is for the safety of innocent people around the world. It's really high right now. It's been really high for a few years. Now, I don't want to get super religious or spiritual in this podcast, but as far as my belief system, and we'll just call it that because I guess truth is apparently relative and we all have our own truths, I happen to believe that things happen for a reason. I happen to believe that doing the right thing and saying the right thing, that it's not so much that it'll be rewarded in heaven, but that we're here on earth to do the right thing. But it doesn't mean that we're going to escape without punishment. And that's where the fear comes in. Because we have a documented history on our planet of people that have done the right thing that have been murdered, either before a crowd or in the privacy of their own home. And so there is this blanket of fear that is now taking place that a lot of white Americans cannot understand unless they've been in that situation or they have the ability of empathy, which some have, some do not. Just like being aware, right?
Yeah.
Are some people aware of what's going on in today's society? Are some people completely unaware? The same goes for heartfelt empathy. Having the ability to have feelings for another human being, to actually be able to take ourselves out of our position in our head and imagine what it may be like in someone else's shoes. Some people don't have that ability, and some could argue that's on par with mental illness, to not have that ability of imagination. There's sympathy and there's empathy. And there's also a big difference between those. So what I'm saying is, there are people out there, they don't like being targeted as a right-wing radical because they voted for Ron Paul. And they say that's bullshit. Some of those people that didn't like being targeted a couple of years ago, here we are in 2016. And most of what these people are saying on the internet, we're talking about liberty people now, not mainstream people, but people that claim that they are for freedom. And they are, I could see some of these people supporting American forces and say a staged, managed World War III scenario with China or Russia.
Yeah,
and
that's not crazy to see that.
For example, Alex Jones specifically. We could see a point in time where it comes down to, well, is the United States going to pay back its debt, or is it not going to pay back its debt? Now there's more conversation taking place that the United States really is not in a position to pay back China. Now, a lot of us already knew this, but now it's becoming more of it's entering the zeitgeist. And as I suspected by this point in time, there'd be more talks about World War III. So what I'm noticing is that there are actual concerns that we have about the future regarding physical safety in a time of war. But I see like this larger conflict with China and Russia by design emerging out of the ashes of this false Islamic invasion. And by the way, I've been doing a lot of traveling in America. Some people know that. Some people are new viewers. I've gone from Portland to Denver to Kansas City. Let me think of what other major cities I've been in, mostly smaller the last year. As far as I know, I'm the only Middle Eastern even looking person anywhere I go. Anywhere I go, I am the only human that looks like he could be a Persian or an Arab. And to some people, I look white. To some people, they believe I look Hispanic. Unless, of course, the person's Hispanic and they hate whites, then I'm white to them. Then I'm white to them. It's wonderful.
Yeah. Oh, dear God, that's so humorous.
It's the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, and,
So for whatever reason, Kyle, I feel like, part of my message is to kind of share what it's like walking in my shoes, but I also have empathy for other people that are in their situations. I just know from experience it's difficult for a lot of Americans to have empathy for the experience of walking through a reality where things have changed and a certain group has been made the enemy. And I think this lack of empathy and feelings, this is really going to wrap up my point, it's going to bite people in the ass. Every time people even make a statement, I'm not trying to go super spiritual on anyone, but I can't hold it back. I ultimately fundamentally feel it's wrong to even type out that certain people should be shot and murdered and raped and hung, to take part in the influence using social media and stating that basically you want to run around killing and raping people because you believe what the media is telling you about these people from around the globe. In the end, Kyle, and we'll do a whole special podcast on this build-up to World War III.
Well,
but the build-up to World War III is going to be really pushed by this, and I'll wrap up this point, disdain and hatred of Americans, the American people in a decade or so, being whole-scale demonized, Kyle, as barbarian savages ready to invade the world. I don't think that explains or defines you or maybe your family. It certainly doesn't explain who I am. But we're both Americans. So this widespread demonization of these countries and the people and perhaps a roundup and even some high-profile murders, maybe a few more countries to be invaded, to me, I'm interpreting this as the road to the occupation of America by Chinese and Russian forces.
Well, regarding the comments that are made by some regarding this whole sniping Syrian refugees thing, I mean that's the 3%ers. I mean, I know exactly where that's coming from, and I've written about them before, and they are as fake and phony as a $2 bill. And why that is probably perhaps best saved for another time, just because of the level of detail involved. But what I will say here is this: I remember 2002. That was, and for those who don't know your history, that was after Afghanistan was invaded, but before Iraq was in 2003. And I remember the TSA, remember those lovely folks? I remember the TSA harassing Americans of an appearance that was Arabic, or just broad Arab ancestry. And it was all types of folks. It was interesting. Sometimes they were Muslims. Other times they were more secular or atheistic or agnostic. And my personal favorite were even the Christian. Actually, well, broadly there were the Christians who looked Arabic. And my personal favorite were the Coptic Christians being harassed by TSA in 2002 or thereabouts. So, yeah, I mean, this demonization, I've written about how the government demonizes Americans before. And look, I mean, this is following a historical pattern, especially with regards to targeting people because of their ancestry, which is tied to foreign policy, by the way. If you go back to World War I, it was the Americans of German ancestry who were spat on and beaten up in certain cases and so forth. In World War II, it was the Americans of Japanese ancestry who were forcibly interred by the federal government on the order of FDR. And now with this so-called war on terror that was officially launched in 2001 and technically hasn't stopped, thank you George W. Bush for that one, then, it's the Americans of Arabic ancestry who are now the political undesirables. And that hasn't changed. And so when the 3%ers who claim to be constitutionalists, they claim to value some notion of freedom, they're completely and unabashedly full of shit for so many reasons. Because they are, as far as I'm concerned, Alex, and I was interviewed about this only once before, but I really do think there is a neocon infiltration of the Patriot movement. No question about it. And I wish more people would be willing to whistleblow. People who are, well, we are talking about heritage and ancestry here. I really wish Americans who are of a more broader European ancestry would follow my example and point this out, because it's easy to see, and not really many are. Nobody's really mentioning how the Patriot movement's been co-opted. So that's kind of disconcerting all by itself. And it does very much play into, what you and I were mentioning before about the rug, the Donald, as it were. But yeah, this is just, it's such a co-option. And there is quite a bit of othering going on. I mean, that's just kind of obvious to see. But, you were mentioning, why aren't there more people of a Middle Eastern ancestry not in the alternative media? That's a very good point. And as a corollary, it's why aren't more people mentioning how portions of the liberty movement have been co-opted? And again, regarding both points, I find that the silence is deafening.
And in a way, there is alternative radicalism when it comes to God, if you will, and the Creator. Just a brief point on that. In the end, I have to have faith in something greater than myself and certainly greater than my audience. How many years have I been living, on the road? And, so a combination of being very controversial, but it has been emotional. So the terrorism that I've been going through has not been, that I've been experiencing, has not been physical terrorism. I've only been attacked physically so many times. It's the looks and it's the fear. It's the knowing they've hijacked my last name in other countries and turned those into terror cells. And that is startling. I'm living in a world where, maybe I should be afraid to even mention that. No, I'm not going to be afraid to even mention that. What I do know is in 2005, that's a few years after 9/11, and that's when I personally got involved in the alternative media through an Access TV show. And while the foundational topics happened to be 9/11, I never obsessed on even the murder of Middle Eastern people. I talked about the emerging domestic American police state. I talked about issues very hyper-specific to Portland, Oregon, and local corruption. I've shown myself over the course of 10 years to be versatile, with even an interest in solar flares, where there is data to show that there is a pattern here that most human beings, for some reason, cognitively, we're going to talk about cognitive impairment in people as well as a topic, but cognitively, a lot of even my audience hasn't even figured it out, or the topic may have driven some people away. So what I know is that I was born into a world. I don't know if there's internet connection problems or not. My computers tell me there is. I know that I was born into a world where, especially now, people are obsessing about white genocide. And white genocide, the idea of which it's not really the way they're making it out to be. Like the gates of hell opening up and barbarians rushing through, gang raping all the white women. Actually, what it really seems to be is an angst from the society. I think there's propaganda to get men that are, and this ties in with MGTOW. It ties in with relationship problems, Kyle, and gender resentment. I'm noticing there are less people getting laid these days in general, which is another topic. It goes deeper. But when there's less people in relationships having a good human time because they're programmed to be in fight, fight, fight mode, there's this widespread assumption that all the women are going black or all the women are going brown, and that's actually not the truth. There's plenty of women out there that still prefer predominantly white men. There are issues, though, going on within us psychologically and the media, and it's caused a lot of resentment and a lot of distrust. So that's my rant on that. The reason some people are not getting laid the way that they were in the past is because of domestic social issues and perhaps other issues that we don't know about. And so it's not the women going for angry Middle Eastern barbarians. Unfortunately, Kyle, that is the narrative that's being put out. That's rants.com, Red Eyes Creations. Now, I'm familiar with those sites because I visited those sites quite frequently. So I'm really familiar with their content and what it used to be 5 years ago and what it is now. John Lash talks about the archons. He's an author. He talks about, the supernatural. One of his last interviews, before he just decided to stop talking about an issue that he wrote a whole book about, was how the archons are functioning through white genocide. He didn't say the archons are functioning through these wars and occupations, the supernatural beings that go bump in the night, right? No. The supernatural beings, they're working through the brown skins in the white genocide. Now, how far away is John Lash's interview with Red Eyes Creations how far away is that from Mormonism and Mormon beliefs, about the darker skins being from the line of Cain? So, I don't know what's going on. I'm not super religious, but I think that there's definitely a dark side, and it feels like the dark side is rising right now. And it's conditioned a certain amount of people within our culture, as well as Australia and Europe and other places. It's almost like we're a few years away from it being mainstream. That if you're from a certain part of the world, that you have a genetic predisposition to terrorism and rape. Now, once we hit that point, Kyle, roundups are not far behind.
Yeah, and I just don't like any of this balkanization, the pitting of people against people, not for like real reasons, real grievances, but really just for fakey made up stuff that really didn't have to happen. If there was to be any sort of, I don't want to say real, but any sort of like real grievances that would be worth forming lines of opposition on, I think it would be the people against the government, quite frankly. Again, another topic, separate topic for another time, but this stuff about pitting folks of one ethnicity against another, or as you mentioned briefly, the sexes against each other. I mean, that's horse crap. I mean, look, me personally, I care about what's in a person's mind and what's in their heart. And that's whom I choose my associations based on. I mean, hell, just to kind of maybe start to close out a little bit here, at least on this, is that there was just a little bit of a personal story. The other day I was in the grocery store, and there was, it was funny, the wife basically just was picking up something from it was actually a package of spaghetti, and it was partially because the package was weakened. It just kind of splayed all over the floor, and everyone's attention was turned to us. And me and the wife, we were just having a rollicking good time. We were good spirits and all that. It was interesting. After I got everything onto the conveyor belt, I then started to pick up the spaghetti, the dry spaghetti that was on the floor, and just completely out of the blue, a woman just started coming in and helping me. And look, just to be perfectly honest, she was not the most physically attractive woman, at least by some standards. However, she was incredibly polite. She was, jovial, and she was talking about, as she was helping me, she was talking about her children. I made some jokes about, well, I guess this is a tale you can probably tell around, the dinner table. And there were some remarks back and forth, and at the end of it, I shook her hand and thanked her very much. So there are people who do exist that actually do give a damn about others and will step in and help. And one of the things I never really liked the MRAs on is this kind of the men's rights activists, so-called, is that they basically think that there's this presumption that like all women are bad or most women are bad. And I don't know, man. I mean, I don't want to make any statements reflecting what may or may not objectively be the situation, but as far as my experiences have gone, virtually every single woman that I've known in my life has treated me at least halfway well. And, even just the other day, that woman, just complete stranger, just helped me for out of the goodness of her heart, I suppose. She didn't pickpocket my wallet or anything like that. So, it's just, I don't know, man. I think that when the corporate media and other vested special interests attempt to sow artificial discord based on the demographic kaleidoscope, whatever combination thereof we're talking about, usually it tends to be race, sex, and sexual orientation, but not always limited to those three.
Right.
I mean, look, and the social justice warriors, the reason I oppose them so much is that they inherently they love balkanizing people, even though they claim to be all about multiculturalism and diversity, when in fact, and this is very evocative of this Orwellian culture, is that they sow discord. They want people at each other's throats. They don't want people collaborating. Never mind the more fundamental thing that I'm more concerned about is people working together so that we can move a vision together of securing our liberties and so forth. So, yeah, that's a little bit of a heady topic. I'll say that much.
Well, to get there, we're going to have to share our stories. And I've done my part to a point. In the future, I'm going to write, I keep saying this, but it's probably going to happen now that I have my own land in the country. Now, at some point in the next calendar year, I'll do a first version of a life story. How about that as a goal? In the next 12 months. It'll be written out. It'll be at least 150 pages. And It'll talk about what it's like to have a father from Afghanistan, but to be an American, but to not be a Muslim, but to speak English and be a part of the alternative media, but to not only look different, but for whatever reason, actually interpret reality also quite a bit differently than some of my peers in the alternative media. Now, I can't chalk that up solely to being a mix of both, the Austrian, Germanic, Anglo-Saxon genes on one side in one corner, and then in the other corner, you have some very ancient genes which actually predate Afghanistan, which is only a term that is 300 years old. So,
yeah.
I have met several others, females, that have a similar mixed line, but they are not activists. And so, there's a reason why I don't put too much stock in genetic disposition, because I believe I have a soul. And I believe I have lived before. I don't care if that sounds crazy, and that's where some of my knowledge comes from. I'm remembering things. And I actually happen to feel the same way about other people, that we're in some sort of a matrix and we're remembering things. And who knows why we're born into certain situations to where we're, half and half, and they happen to be the targeted group. The question is, did we ever, in any other reality, do anything to others or judge others because of their color of skin or economic status? So I'm not trying to force my ideas beyond anyone else, but instead of turning to a radical myself, because that's the assumption that they're putting out, Kyle, that once people become aware of these injustices, there's only one option, and it's radicalism. And this isn't just a way that Middle Eastern people are demonized. You have the 3%ers, you have the sovereign citizens. We've all heard people talk about shutting down a road or doing something by force. Or there's Bruce Doucette, who actually called for Costilla County officials to be arrested. We see this kind of push towards extremism across the planet. And now that they have the internet, now that they control aspects of information and social media, they can custom direct people to extremism. Now, what I've been trying to say for years, I'm not a New Ager, but I believe in spirit and will continue to believe in spirit, and there's a reason why we're here. If someone could open up their mind for 5 seconds when they're angry and upset and feeling like a victim and realize maybe there's a reason why we're going through what we're going through, we can avoid extremism. We can avoid suicide. We can avoid alcoholism. We can avoid hurting others because we feel powerless. Those social justice warriors are powerless. That's why they want to emotionally hurt someone. Oh, you're a man. Oh, you have white privilege. Ah, yes. You have an inclination to rape. 1 in 5. That is a sign of powerlessness. And so those white men that are feeling targeted, they're the last ones, Kyle, to be pointing the fingers because they're feeling attacked at Middle Eastern people. That is what the machine wants them to do. And so go, wait a minute. The things they're saying about me and my friends are not true. This is bullshit, and this is America. Why are they exaggerating things to this level? Gee, I don't know. Maybe they're exaggerating other things. So NATO can be in Afghanistan at least up until 2020, which is the latest article I just posted at amtvmedia.com. And every year they do this, Kyle. No, we're going to be in Afghanistan another few years. And no matter how many times Bush or Obama or the future Trump presidency or Sanders Clinton, people believe it. Every time they say, well, we have a date that we're going to get out of this country. It's going to be next year or in a few years. And so, again, kind of recentering on where we started from, here the topic of Afghanistan is re-entering the picture. How many years after 9/11? And you said for a few decades. Yeah, things have been really fucked up for a few decades. But if we go a little bit further back, again, we have Genghis Khan, we have Alexander the Great. They've all these super state nations, and whether it was karma or not that led to their later downfall, geez, I really don't know. Obviously, it was poor military strategy for these super state nations to put all their, eggs in one basket, if you will, and overstretch their resources in the country known as Afghanistan. We know, as a part of the history record, we don't know all the reasons why, but we know that it's a region that many people have tried to come in and conquer. And in the end, they have overstretched their resources and saw themselves in a state of decline. The latest data that we have is that they have discovered certain minerals, lithium, in recent years, other things in more recent years, like the last. This is after the information came out about the Unocal pipeline, where they were negotiating with the Taliban to have a natural gas pipeline running through the country. But it's been in recent years that these conversations about the rare earth minerals have come about. So, a lot of Americans and the drug running, they know on an aspect of their cognitive function, their brain, their analytical side, their ability to kind of remember headlines that they read. On one level, they may question 9/11 and know that they are in Afghanistan for the minerals and a military strategic position for World War III, potentially, and other things, oil. But they're unable to see the demonization of a whole group of people. So the military presence continues. I'm just scratching my head, Kyle's all pause here. Are we getting dumber? Or do we go in these cycles to where we get dumber, then we wake up a little bit, then we get dumber, then we wake up a little bit? I'm trying to wrap my mind around it, because clearly the next step after this is to demonize the American people along similar lines. So there can be some sort of intervention here in our country. And I'll tell you what, those Russian soldiers, those Chinese soldiers, they can go ahead and prop Putin up all they want as some sort of peacemaker. There's going to be some raping going on of Americans, both male and female, if it ever comes to that. And it's always going to come down to, why do you keep doing this? Why won't the world intervene? Well, look at what you did to those people. There's a reason why they show on CNN the Marines a couple years ago. I saw it in 2011 and was traumatized then. It's like they're sitting there pissing on dead Afghan bodies is what they're doing. And CNN is showing them physically do this. Why? Why? Why is CNN showing the American people? Couple perspectives. It's in plain sight. There it is. Are you going to go along with this? I mean, we're showing you what we're actually doing. Are you still for this? Are you still for the demonization whole scale of a whole group of people? We've showed you the torture pictures. You've seen them pissing on them. You've read reports about them raping their children. And there are still people that are showing that they have no feeling. I mean, Kyle, none of this stuff is turning me into an extremist. It's turning me into someone that really wonders, why is this really happening on a larger level beyond what I, in a linear sense, cognitively can know and prove? Because I can feel that there is some sort of co-opting of the American soul.
Well, perhaps this is one thing that you and I might disagree, at least to some degree, on. But, if Americans were a politically mature people, they would have had a revolution over what happened at Abu Ghraib. They would have used force to stop the government before they conducted mass murder, even more so. And not just regarding Afghanistan, but especially Iraq as well, when the depleted uranium rounds were used in Fallujah, that not just individually murdered the inhabitants there, but genetically wrecked the population. But Americans are not a politically mature people, in my not so humble opinion, because they did not wage a revolution to force the government to stop murdering foreigners who have caused us no harm. Having said that, I will say this. You mentioned earlier about cycles. I really am leaning more towards that it does seem to be kind of cyclical. I mean, if you look at other types of cycles like the Tytler cycle, in a lot of ways, if the Tytler cycle is historically accurate, then that would explain why there are these periods of liberty contrasted with tyranny. And, some people are kind of debating our current situation, which I think is statism. Exactly where are we in the Tytler cycle? And it's interesting, right? I mean, how do you make the decision about that? I mean, do you try to make it a collective decision? Do you make it more on an individual basis? I mean, maybe some are farther along the Tytler cycle than others. Maybe there are some people who are still apathetic and basically debasing themselves in one way or another. And there's other folks who really are in bondage, like as bondage comes, right? I mean, there are political prisoners. Um, and then there's also other people who have some degree of courage, and maybe even a few who really are living at liberty. But not many people are really experiencing or otherwise taking to heart some sort of what depends which version of the Tytler cycle you look at. Sometimes it's called spiritual awakening. Other times it's called faith. But, faith is really the bridge between bondage and the courage part of it, and then the courage leads you to liberty. But I don't know, man. I mean, I think quite a bit of people they're either in bondage or they're more in like dependency and maybe some degree of apathy, but I think it's more dependency and bondage. So, assuming I'm right about that, then that would explain why nothing is really developing well, at least, well, I don't want to say but nothing is really moving in any sort of good way. I mean, this is getting a little bit of a different topic, but when you look at a lot of disingenuous activists, a lot of them are actually, whether they mean to or not, they are helping the establishment. They are helping the government. I mean, look at the partyarchy of the LP. I mean, my God. I mean, Gary Johnson, for the second time, is now their nominee. It's like, wow, really? Okay, that's rather interesting for a lot of reasons. And again, maybe that's perhaps a topic for another time, going a little bit deeper as to how a lot of co-option has happened. But regarding, I guess, the emotional maturity, I think is what you're getting at. To go back to the example of what happened at the grocery store the other day, there is something I did notice, and I should have mentioned this earlier. When I stooped over to pick up the dry spaghetti, there was looks coming from at least 5 individuals when I scanned my surroundings, and it wasn't hatred, but it was disgust. It was really palpable. I mean, if looks could kill, and I wasn't scared.
What happened? You dropped some spaghetti at the grocery store?
Yeah, I mentioned this earlier, and it was just
okay.
And it was just they just had disgust in their eyes and in their facial expression and such, and so that when that woman, like I mentioned earlier, when that woman came to help me, and then I thanked her, afterwards, and we had a little bit of a jovial back and forth. I mean, to use a term I've heard you use quite a bit, those other folks that had that look at me were quite archonic, quite a bit. It was, if they could put my head on a pike, I think they would at least consider it. But that woman who helped me, it was like night and day. So, and when she was helping me, I just kind of focused on her. And, and then of course, when she left, then pretty much by that time, the wife came back, because there was a last minute thing she wanted to grab, and then everything was fine. But yeah, the emotional attitudes that people have, even with something as basic and as, dare shall I say, routine as going to the grocery store, and even when there's an accident that didn't even cause any real damage, yeah, it's just wow, like that's kind of where they're at, and that was right here, in town, right here in Austin. So, man.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to talk more about that because we're going to continue this for 5 more minutes for those listening, and we're going to include this podcast topic, and then we're going to launch into some other topics in another video. But what I want to say, people have listened to my commentary. I've been very critical of the American woman for a lot of different reasons, but that's the mainstream one, controlled by, influenced by propaganda and other environmental factors. Not all of it's mainstream media, but there are environmental, social, peer pressure. But that doesn't mean everyone, but certainly it's not limited to just the white American woman. Back to my relatives. And this ties in with solutions. Well, what are the solutions? Well, I talked a little bit about white Americans being targeted and the solution for them to see beyond their own targeting and see others being targeted as well and not support the people that are doing the targeting. That's not going to help their situation. But and most of them are fairly good looking. The relatives that I have, the Ansary women, and, as people already know about my background, I'm, English speaking American born, live with my mother. I'm considered an outcast from that side of the family. And I'm also not a Muslim. So their lesson in this, first of all, they shouldn't be demonizing or rejecting anyone for choosing to abstain from the religion of Islam. In that sense, I will refrain from saying anyone has brought anything on themselves. I will say that it's probably not good to be brainwashed by religion. It's probably not good to think, I'm not saying from a radical thing, but they may see certain things through the lens of religion. There's various ways, various examples I can give. We don't have the time. Where someone will choose, well, that person's suffering because they're not a Muslim, because, the book of Quran says you got to obey your father. Well, what if the father is abusive and he's choking the son? So there was a reason why I rebelled against my father's physical abuse during that brief year I lived with him in 96, 97, 98, 2.5, 3 years. So I rejected control and brainwashing. And the brainwashing wasn't, no, be a Muslim, be a Muslim. It was like worship the American educational school system. Again, a lot of Americans don't realize how many Middle Eastern immigrants are here in their country that are worshiping them. They may say they're Muslim, but they're really worshiping the American culture. They're really worshiping their selfie. They're really pulling the Kim Kardashian. Going, look how hot I look with my lipstick. I mean, when people think Middle Eastern women, they think burqa. They don't think Kim Kardashian with that big, fat, juicy ass. Just look at that. Now, no, my relatives don't actually show their ass, but they show their extreme physical, sexual beauty. So the solution for them is to stop being so scared. There are people speaking out and speaking their truth. They can go ahead and be a Muslim all they want, but one thing they're not are people that blow up bombs. There are people that will terrorize people emotionally. Oh, you're not one of us. Oh, you didn't submit to thy father. Thy male rules the house. Well, fuck you and your hierarchy of control. I rebel against your archonic influence, which I did. And they basically, yeah, we know what the aftermath was. Nothing that I've said, Kyle, has reached them regarding this commentary. This podcast may reach a few of them. If they want to know the solutions to their own predicament, they can't just be Muslim immigrants to the United States of America with 3 Ks, not 1 C. They gotta ask God for the intellect then, the intelligence. Ask Allah to help you not be a dumbass. If Allah's got the power, ask God for help. We do it in our culture. We ask God in some cases, if we believe in a creator, for help being better people. But we know we got to do the work ourselves. We know that. So that means reading books. That means educating ourselves. That means getting out of our comfort zone. They are in a cult. And unfortunately, it does partially involve their religion. Yeah, I've never seen a respectful, a really intelligent discourse between myself and Muslims, period. There's been a few viewers that have claimed that they're Muslim that have come and gone. There was one Afghani that was watching at one time. And, he got pissed off that I wouldn't believe him, that I was being personally gang-stalked, like something out of a beautiful mind. It's pretty sad. One of the few Afghan viewers that I ever had was kind of ape shit fucking cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. So, I feel, Kyle, that I meant to kind of say that I am a combination of these bloodlines, Anglo-Saxon and the Afghani, and I've made a huge contribution to the alternative media. And while I don't have the fanship of Alex Jones, there's certainly some people out there that think I'm more in line with the truth than the shit that he's spewing. So the reason I do periodically mention my background in the pain is to also shine light on, number one, to show that I can overcome certain things. And there are people out there that are maybe just a group, white, black, Hispanic, and, they're feeling real sorry for themselves. And maybe they have some things going for them, maybe a house, maybe a job. And I think what I've demonstrated is that I can be mixed race and be of a line that's being targeted and have an Islamic last name and overcome the fear of being murdered and assassinated because other Afghans are in real time. It's traumatic to me. It is like a punishment. It feels like a punishment to be born, to be alive right now. And to know that my own line is being removed from the planet, and yet my immediate family is more in line with that serves the military and the occupation. And so they're like an extreme form of classis, being that the Ansaris are not exactly peasants in Afghanistan, from what I understand. They were always considered government class individuals. And so, people trying to come up with my closing statements, people really have been brainwashed right now into seeing value, whether someone has a higher value or lower value, whether someone's perceived to be more safe or less safe. Right now it's being done along racial lines. I, like you, believe these things were cyclical, but I think that as dangerous as things are, it is really important for people of all racial backgrounds and political backgrounds, but these political belief systems are bullshit, and they have really messed people up, not just our system, but so-called elections in Pakistan and Afghanistan. All that's rigged. People got to get beyond their religious programming and beyond these illusions of self. Well, I'm white and you're Middle Eastern. You're a mutt. You're both. Oh my God, you're white genocide. Yes, Alex Ansary is white genocide in the flesh. Thank you for listening. So it's like, I want to see people get beyond this racial divide, because if they can't do this, they're going to end up being a victim of it, either a victim of it and not educating themselves and not realizing, like a lot of these Middle Eastern Americans do not realize what country they're in. They thought, oh, I'm just a good Muslim. I'll go to a university. My name, Khalid Muhammad Shalifa, will never be an issue. It's an issue. It's an issue. They may be happy that they're not in burqas and under Taliban control now, but they're in America. They're in a country where the people are being told and things are being projected that those people are a threat. So there is no other way towards freedom, Kyle. People got to organize. People got to speak. People got to communicate along racial lines. They got to ditch their religious and political programming, and laying down and just being quiet, and making a whole lot of money, and having a townhouse and impressing your wife and all these things. These things don't lead ultimately to happiness, because these Afghan Ansaris that have never in one day made a YouTube video about anything, they live in fear. End of story. And it controls their actions in silence. Alex Ansary doesn't live with that kind of fear. If something's going to happen to me, it's going to happen to me. I've done more in one day than any of those other Ansaris from Afghanistan will do in a single lifetime. If anything, Kyle, I'm trying to set an example regarding courage and bravery combined with wisdom, because we have a whole bunch of 3%ers out there acting like they're courageous and brave, and they're running into danger. They're running into the arms of Roger Marsh and Bruce Doucette and people like them, but they don't have the wisdom to redirect that bravery in a more mindful way. So,
I'm glad.
Concluding thought, people wonder why I go off grid. Look at the world events right now and tell me how sane it would be for me to voluntarily stay in that insane asylum.
Well, I'm glad you have the courage to speak truth to power, and, I wish that all sorts of people would be a lot less cowardly, because honestly, if the population was less cowardly, I think we'd have our liberty back today, and I'm not joking. I really do think that. As far as like an action item, just to kind of end on a good note, I think there is something to be said for etiquette and politeness and treating your neighbor as you yourself would like to be treated, what some people would call the biblical golden rule. I do think there is value in, for lack of a better term, keeping the peace. And even with people that you may disagree about with, whatever the hell, even if it's just a market preference, like, I like vanilla ice cream, but you like scotch. Whether it's that or it's again demographic characteristics of one flavor or another. I think there is value in just treating others, with the same dignity and respect as you would really any other human. Now, I will say this: for some people who are suffering from, shall I put it, natural prejudice, perhaps for them, one approach that they could consider starting their path on is maybe imagining that others who look different from themselves in their own mind, just as a psychological trick, actually are like themselves. And breaking down what you've referred to as the illusion of separation, to kind of break that down a little bit. What I personally do is I just kind of, for people I don't know, I just see a tabula rasa, and then, I try to have some sort of interaction with them in one sense or another, and based on what both they say and, more importantly, what they do, then I make my judgments based on their individual merit, whether I think they're, worth a damn or not. Because there are some bad people who do exist, and I've come across plenty, way too many for one lifetime. So there have been some good people that I've come across, as well as some bad people, and what I just really kind of suggest to everyone as far as what they can do in their own lives to increase their own personal liberty is basically judge people based on their individual merit, what they say, and more importantly, what they do. And form your associations on, based on the individuality of the folks that you come across in your own personal as well as professional lives and so forth, instead of demonizing or even praising people based on superficial collective characteristics of whatever demographic flavor of the month we're dealing with. Because I really do think collectivism is an evil, that it is painting broad brushes where it shouldn't, and so forth. Now, that is not to say there isn't some value in certain types of cultures and certain types of, I'll just say, market preferences, and there is a place in the world for that, absolutely. By the same token, I don't think it's wise or even good or conducive with the principles of liberty to basically say that, well, just because you have this type of skin color, you happen to have this type of genitalia, you happen to be attracted to these type of people, that therefore that means you are good or bad or whatever. That's awfully authoritarian, and that is what I oppose. So, that's really just kind of how I look at things. And again, Alex, I really appreciate your insight regarding these types of matters.
Well, it was great covering all this material in this podcast, and I appreciate you coming on to discuss these things and bounce some ideas off me.
Okay, cool. I'll talk to you later, man.
Okay. Talk to you again soon.